Some good news. Should we dream for a moment that the woke mind virus might just be on its deathbed? According to Pew Research, 52% of American workers have been trained in diversity, equity and inclusion at a cost, can you believe it, of $8 billion a year to industry. But DEI policies, popularised in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, well, they're starting to be wound back as people get sick to death of being pitted against each other.
Were they because of George Floyd? Or I suppose he did say popularised. You have to be careful with journalists, though, because they say words like popularised and they're trying to convey a different intent and meaning behind it. So they're trying to say that the George Floyd, like his death and then the subsequent riots, they're trying to conjure all those images and a pride of and everything. All that stuff that followed that summer, they're trying to link that to DEI. Well, I'm pretty sure DEI was before. I remember it before that. And then a lot of corporations were already doing it. And I would be interested as well to know that when they say 52% of the workforce, what they need to do is break that down a little bit more. But what they're trying to convey is a certain type of intent behind it. They're trying to conjure up images of 52% of companies run DEI, when it doesn't mean that at all. You got to think of who the biggest employers are, and then think, okay, how much of a percent of the working population are they hiring? You know, corporations like McDonald's or Microsoft or Google. Are they the biggest hirers in the country? I don't know, because I'm not looking at the data right now. This is the job of the journalist, if they want to do a good job of explaining the information to you.
Walmart is the latest corporation to announce they are completely abandoning DEI policies. And this is not a tweak, this is an absolute overhaul of all of their policies. Here's what they've announced. They've announced that they will close down their Equity Racial Centre, which they established in 2020 at a cost of $100 million. That's gone. They've said they're no longer going to take into account the racial and gender mix of suppliers when ordering contracts. They've said they're no longer going to monitor LGBTQ plus inclusion in their workplace. But more than that, they're going to review the sponsorship of all Pride events, so they're not financially supporting anything that sexualises children, which basically means they won't be supporting any Pride events. And on top of that, they're reviewing all...
Oh, that last comment there, that's not true. There were some Pride events that were showing off S&M bondage in front of children, and I agree that that is wrong. But to equate that to all Pride events doing that isn't true. There's actually quite a significant movement within Pride to stop what's happening in America. And bearing in mind, this is in the States, this isn't in other countries. Like, as far as I know, we haven't had this on any significant level in the UK. I have a friend who runs Pride events and nothing has happened at her events like that. So, again, this is what we need to be careful of. We can't be equating what's happening in America to what's happening in our own countries. And then we need to take with a grain of salt the way that these journalists are saying things. And remember that when it influences your opinions later, you can't, because what he's done there is that he's anchored the statement with the last thing that he said before he moves on to a completely separate statement. The only thing you're going to remember is the anchoring of Pride with child abuse, which is pretty dangerous, because like I say, not all Pride events were doing that. It was a very it's been a very compartmentalized thing.
All of their products and getting rid of anything that sexualizes or promotes trans and non-binary products to children. Now, bear in mind...
And again, this is something that I find very difficult to personally get behind, when the entire fashion industry, I look at Balenciaga, has been caught sexualizing children. I remember seeing, like, my sister had a skirt when she was like 12, and in the skirt on the back said "don't touch." I had a hissy fit about it, and then my parents laughed. They thought I was just being stupid. And I'm like, you're sexualizing your 12-year-old daughter. What do you think you're doing? You know, I was in my 20s at the time, and I saw it very differently.
Walmart employ 1.8 million.
My point being that when everything is doing it, sexualizing children to this really high degree, when the BBC are allowing abuse to happen, when all of these other companies and all these countries are allowing wholesale abuse and trafficking of children, and then even clothing companies are allowing all of this stuff, why are we singling out Pride for doing it? This should be a wholesale issue that we're looking at, and then we're not doing it. So this is why I think that when I hear reports like this, that's what I'm questioning. Where is your intent coming from? Because if you really cared about the children, you would be talking about these other things right now in this news report while you're talking about it. Or if this report is just about them, you would be directing people to where else you've spoken about it as well.
Million Americans. So this is a big deal, but they're not the first company to do this. The Ford Motor Company, Lowe's, Boeing, Harley Davidson have all announced prior to Walmart's announcement that they too are abandoning DEI principles. So Joe and Liz, here's my question.
Yes.
Is this because of Trump, or was this already happening and Trump kind of tapped into a groundswell that existed already and is growing stronger, not just in America, but maybe here in Australia as well? Dare we dream?
I think this was definitely already happening as these companies just came to bear with what they were actually doing and going, what are we getting out of this? It's certainly not floating with our base. On top of the companies that you've already listed, there's John Deere, Tractor Supply.
I hate this idea that companies have a base. Again, I'm not commenting on the cancellation of the DEI policies. I'm talking about specifically what she just said. The companies have a base. A base of supporters? Like, are you agreeing with the politicization of materialist purchases? My politics are very separate to that. The fact that I want to protect children has nothing to do with my politics and has everything to do with me being a functional human being that doesn't want to see children unnecessarily suffer and be exploited. I don't need to be left or right wing to think that. So this idea that companies have a base is very weird. Very weird.
Molson Coors, Jack Daniels. I think they've just realised we're spending all these money on this DEI initiatives. It's simply not floating with our customer base, and perhaps just the general question of what are we doing this anyway? Like, John Deere is a tractor company. What interest do you have in DEI, in preaching to people, whether it be your employees or your clients, your customers, about this kind of thing?
You see, this is where I think that, so I don't know where to start on this and say it in a way that people will listen long enough to listen to what I'm saying without unfollowing me or switching off. Because I agree with the issues. I disagree with how they're being solved. Because the DEI literature that we have, and there's been plenty of people that have left the field and they're now talking about it, it's being done in the wrong way. Yes, we need to be awake to societal problems, but you can't preach to people. And everything I know in psychology means that you can't preach to people. And I'd hate to bring it up, but look what happened to Jesus when he was preaching. All right? This is base human psychology that we're talking about. People do not like being preached to. They like to come to their own decisions about things. And I will tell you about psychology. You can make people think that they came to the decision themselves. And then so DEI has been too much of a hammer, and it's not been subtle enough. And they lost sight on why they were doing it, the people that they were doing it for, and chasing the end result of everybody believing what we believe. You're never going to have that. And so you need to go about it in such a way that you remember what your message is meant to be and the people that you're supposed to be trying to help. I think that's what the issue is. And I think that's why so many people have been switched off to it. Because the vast majority of people, certainly ones that I know, whether in person or over the internet or whatever, would agree that there are societal issues out there. That's why I'm a Liberal Democrat. I have a social conscience. And most people, by the way, would vote Liberal Democrat if they thought they could get into power. But anyway, I think I've said enough about that anyway.
Also, what helps really get this on the nose is a new study by a place called Network Contagion Research Institute, NCRI, in America. They've done some study on these DEI practices, which are very prolific, not just in workplaces, but in schools, in universities, very much in America, and as we know, here in Australia as well. So here's the guy who headed up this study. His name is
How do you know it's a him, Liz?
Finkelstein. He said what we did in this study was we took a lot of these ideas that were found to still be very prominent in a lot of these DEI lectures and interventions and training, and we said, well, how is this going to affect people? What we found is that when people are exposed to this ideology, what happens is they become hostile without any indication that anything racist actually happened.
Okay, this isn't anything new. We know this about psychology already. And if you saw earlier on the screen, it says they've coined this as hostile attribution bias. Attribution bias isn't hostile or not. Attribution bias is neutral, and it is a phenomena in human psychology. Anything that you've just read can impact your next behavior. It can increase the statistical likelihood that you will react in accordance with what you just read or heard or saw. Okay? This is not surprising. So what happens is that, like they said there, if they read something that presents the DEI ideology, then they can act hostile without any indication that anything racist has happened. That is how attribution bias works.
These findings from this research were so shocking and forceful that the authors automatically, they'd use 324 participants in the original piece of work, in which they gave some people just a completely race-neutral piece of text on corn of all topics to read, and then they gave other participants these really race-baity articles by well-known Kendi and D'Angelo, who are really big on all things racism. So they got all these participants.
Okay, so what they're doing here is a comparator study. So they're comparing the information that's being given to the participants. I'm assuming they've been put into randomized groups. They've got 324 people. We don't know from the reporting if they're students and just students at one university or several. These things are all important for judging how much we can trust this information. Okay, so whenever you're looking at trying to understand what a journalist is telling you about a study, you got to think of, I can trust this by X percentage. And at the moment, the percentage that we can trust with what they're saying is about 50%, because there's a lot of information they're leaving out. So what they did here is that they gave these articles out. They were real articles, with one article that appeared neutral to the researchers about corn. They gave that to one group, and then to the other groups they gave different articles to, and then they measured what the responses were. So they had to. So then they then gave a profile of a student that was denied admission to the university, and then they were then asked a set of questions about why this person was not admitted to the university. So the questions include: how many microexpressions did the applicant experience? How much harm did the applicant experience? How violent was the interviewer? How biased was the admin officer? How fair was the applicant's rejection? Was the applicant a person of colour? Was the admissions officer's decision racially biased? Was the admissions officer white? None of which you can really... I mean, this is the point of the study, by the way. None of this you can make a judgment on either way based on the rejection letter or the admissions process. You're not supposed to anyway. And again, we don't actually know what the information was that they gave to the students or to the participants about the fake or real applicant and their rejection. Again, this is why how much we can trust it. I've just dropped how much we could trust it to about 40%, because we don't know what information was given about the applicant.
Together, and then they gave them a completely race-neutral scenario in which a student is rejected from college, and they asked for these people's responses. Well, the research was absolutely comprehensive.
Again, no discussion of statistical values. No, because there's always a percentage chance that it can be due to chance that that the participants that are there were just like a random selection. It's just chance that we got those results. We need to have a 95% certainty that it wasn't due to chance, which leaves a 5% or less probability that it is due to chance, basically, afterwards. So you're looking at between less than 1 to 5% chance in every study less than 1% to 5% probability in every study that those results are due to chance, and that is considered an acceptable acceptable chance, acceptable level of probability.
The implications of these findings can simply not be downplayed. The research clearly showed that instead of achieving equality, dismantling systemic oppression, which is what all these DEI tick boxes are supposed to be doing, they may well, in fact, be deepening divisions and this cultural resentment between races. So well done to all the corporations spending $8 billion a year.
Okay, so I don't think I see anything else at the end of this. You can go watch it if you want, from Sky News Australia. But what they're leaving out here is that a better study would have done it the other way. Would have compared this with the opposite. So, or in their follow-up study, they would compare this with the opposite. So this is an anti-DEI article, right? And I'm not saying I'm pro or anti it. Right, that's just something that I need to get across in this video, but this is very much an anti-DEI article. Now, you're being primed by this, and then if you go and read, if you do the same study, and then get everybody to watch this, and then read a rejection where somebody was clearly racist, you're more likely to say, oh, my hypothesis would be that you're more likely to say that that it wasn't due to racism when there was clearly racism in the rejection. All right, if I made one up. So you need to have a comparison study just to show that you need to show that the attribution bias that they're showing here doesn't work both ways in order to show that DEI is bad and evil, needs to be expunged from society. This isn't enough evidence on its own to suggest what the news anchor there is saying. Anyway, we'll leave that one there, I think.